Intro. You got the name right. Great job. I'll just go ahead and call up our panelists. As Steve mentioned, the topic for today is in-building wireless coverage, and what are some of the challenges, design solutions, and other factors that property owners are taking into consideration as they're trying to increase the coverage within the various buildings. So. Unfortunately, Josh, I don't know if you mentioned, wasn't able to make it today. He got hung up with a flight issue. So I'll go ahead and just ask our panelists to do a quick introduction to themselves.
Sure. I'm used to talking really loud, but I'll use this today. So my name is Paul Fettuccia. I'm from Advanced Network Services. I am the President and General Manager, have been so for close to 20 years. We are in the construction industry. We're also in the engineering space. We deal with primarily cell tower installation, in-building wireless design and implementation, DC and AC power, and also network infrastructure. Thank you very much, and I'm very excited to be on this panel today.
Dominic Villecco from V-COMM. I'm the president of V-COMM. We're a RF engineering and DAS design and integration firm. Been in the industry for 37, going on 38 years. I've seen it from 1G, and now looking at 5G coming up, and done the whole gamut of things across those 37 years. And hopefully I'll be able to share some of that with you this afternoon.
Greg Najjar, Director of Business Development at ADRF. We're a DAS and repeater manufacturer, so we provide indoor and outdoor solutions for both commercial cellular and public safety, and work with carriers, integrators, distributors, and of course enterprise. So thank you for having me, and look forward to the panel.
Great, thanks all for being here. Just a quick question for the audience. Show of hands, anyone here who's involved in real estate management, building ownership, dealing with in-building wireless issues currently? Okay, we'll take that into consideration. Anyone else involved directly or indirectly in helping solve those issues? Okay, good. All right then. So Dominic, question for you. I recently spoke with a few commercial real estate managers, and they're still in reactive mode for the most part. Is that something that you're seeing yourself, and do you envision any changes in that trend in the near term?
That's exactly what we're seeing. It seems to be primarily reactive. I know you come to some of these conferences, and I think there are some real estate groups that are proactive, but for the most part, what I've seen is it's a reactive situation. They're looking, the question is, do I have wireless coverage? If it's a new building, the answer is no, unless they've planned it in there, and we're working on a couple projects right now where it's still an afterthought. Not all projects, but it's still an afterthought. And then you get into a building where it's an existing building, and they start to hear complaints from tenants in the building. Again, it becomes a so for now, it's still reactive. Probably a small percentage of it is proactive, but I would say for some period of time, I think it's going to continue to be reactive.
Okay. What are some of the, for those that want to be proactive, what are some of the leading indicators you recommend they look out for to try to understand, whether they currently have or eventually are going to run into these types of challenges?
I think it depends on the building and the venue. For example, some of the buildings, like we've got a couple of hospital projects that we're working on. Hospitals are quasi-public, or they're public facilities. So what we've seen in hospitals are things like doctors and staff and their technology groups are trying to use devices more proactively, trying to, they've got apps. One hospital that we're talking to actually has encrypted texting. I'm assuming it's to meet the HIPAA requirements, but encrypted texting. So when you have an organization like that is trying to use technology to assist their workforce and visitors, I think you see a lot of proactive steps being taken. We've talked to like real estate groups, and a lot of the real estate groups, it's things that you've heard today. You heard it in some of this morning's panels about things like, we want to increase tenant, or, decrease vacancies, that type of thing. We've talked to groups that talk about that, but there's one other thing that we heard this morning. It was Steve Yapsuka that said it about, it all comes down to money. That's one of the big drivers that we've seen.
Got it. Greg or Paul, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things we talked about earlier was, of course, looking at the various impediments to coverage. For folks who are in the industry, such as all of us, I said, something I've learned about is, like, say, LEED certified. I think we've heard that term for many years. We understand that the windows, it makes for a green facility. It can block wireless signals and whatnot. But the other thing I've been looking at more recently is the various levels, for green, silver, platinum, things like that, which, have various degrees. But for us, so if I'm looking through various building, construction plans, floor plans, other components about a building, you see LEED platinum, that's a prime target already. Sometimes you'll come across these terms. So I think from my perspective, seeing as how, again, there aren't really any building owners in the audience, but from this industry, if you're looking for various things, learn about what they face. So we talk all in technology terms. The folks in those spaces are not necessarily technology specialists, so certain things may go over their head or fly under the radar in terms of what we would think is commonplace. Say, oh, you should of course know that. You want to upgrade to 5G. Trust me, they barely are getting a system in place, as Dominic said. So now you're talking about upgrade to 5G, which can be very daunting. So learn about things that they face every day, which is complaints from tenants, customers, LEED certified, things that come through their shop. I met with a controller, and we were in Miami looking at a few hotels, getting ready for Super Bowl, and this one DoubleTree property, immediately this gentleman said, we sought him out, and he said, yes, we had perfect coverage until they built this building right next door. And if you know anything about Miami Beach, everyone's fighting for beachfront. There are hundreds and hundreds of properties there. They have to squeeze these properties in very unique styles, angles, 20 stories, because they all want a beautiful backdrop of the ocean and the beach. So what happens is the lobby is an odd configuration, the parking, the garage, everything is jammed into very small spaces, lots of concrete. It's all secondary for that great restaurant or pool. So subsequently, the signals for your phones and everything else get really crushed. So he was desperate to have some solution. So that became something that I looked at when I was down there, was what are the oddest looking buildings in the most, highly dense areas that we could talk to. And, Nobu Hotel, I mean, you can't imagine the types of stuff, but you could spend a month there and still not hit every place, so.
Okay. And Paul, I mean, when you're talking to potential clients, what are some of the things you're telling them to look out for? And furthermore, once you actually get in there, what are you finding in the building? What kind of conditions and issues and challenges from a technical, architectural, perspective?
Sure. So we kind of try to break it up into two components when we start evaluating different structures that are there that we're asked to go look at. First, we look to see if they actually have a system in place. And sometimes they may not, or most of the times they may not. So if you have a building that doesn't have a DAS system or some kind of repeater system in there, there are a couple basic things. For example, they might have had good coverage at one point and now they've lost coverage. What are the things that are driving them to lose that coverage? It could be the macro site that's feeding that site could actually be having issues. It could have a sector that's down. They could have done technology upgrades. They changed the down tilts on it, and it's not hitting that building properly. Also, the owner of the building may have upgraded the facility. They added new new windows in the structure, and now that's blocking the RF from getting into the facility. Also, if they've changed the facade of the building at all, they could have used different building materials that actually block those signals. So those are some of the basic things that we see if there's not a system in place and they're getting degraded signal coming into the facility. If they have an existing system, some of those same parameters hold true, but also what could be happening is that their system is becoming antiquated. Their antennas that they're using may not support some of the new technology. For example, we just had a facility that we completed, a large football stadium. It's a multi-tenant facility. One carrier was driving the DAS system in there. They're looking to add that second carrier on there, but the antennas that are in that facility wouldn't support the 2.3 megahertz spectrum so that they could broadcast their LTE on there. So that's one of the issues that you can see, is that the technology that's been put in there doesn't support the new technology that's coming down the pike. Other things, for example, the structure of the building. There's may have been modifications that were done inside the building that now have changed the placement of the antennas. They could be blocked. They could have been put initially above or below the ceiling. They went in, put a new ceiling in place, more hardened ceiling. That's going to block the signals from getting through as well. You know, similar when construction's going on in a building, for example, you may have some guys that really don't realize what some of that cabling is. It may not be in conduit. There may be some coax that was exposed. There could be a chance that some of the guys doing the work in the facility actually pinched the cable or cut it, things of that nature, and that would render some of those antennas useless. And then also the power factors associated with the old systems. They actually had less or more coverage with less power. Today, you actually need more power for less coverage, so you may have to increase the power and the amount of radios that you actually have in the system. So those are just some of the basic factors that we've seen down the road and having problems in buildings.
It just kind of strikes me that you know, a lot of information to deliver, you know, to a building owner manager who just doesn't have that awareness. I mean, how does that go over when you're trying to explain it to them and you know, the associated costs?
Usually not very well. They almost always have sticker shock. They also always have sticker shock. Some of the issues really are what they feel that they're getting for the dollars that they're spending, right? So they think, you know, they're going to spend $40K, just throwing a number out there. They're thinking they're going to spend $40K and be able to get coverage in their entire building for all carriers. And as we know in this industry, that's probably not the case. So when they start, they always tell you they want that all carriers to be covered, but 9 times out of 10, with the budget they have, they can maybe cover one carrier. So, you know, once again, you got to peel that onion back and find out what their true needs are. They're just parts of the building that they want covered. Are they, is there really primarily one carrier that they need, or are they really looking for a solution? And then, you know, push that forward. Are there options for them to finance, you know, the build of that? And also, you know, are there carriers that are interested in potentially working with them to upgrade their system?
Thanks. And Dominic, you and I were talking about, you know, many situations where they're just going to have to rip and replace the entire infrastructure. And you know, how does that go over? And what are typically the conditions you find where, you know, that's the only option going forward?
Well, it's interesting because I agree with Paul. Where first of all, they do all have sticker shock. That's one, and I think the root cause of the sticker shock is that they're not technologists. One of the things that you heard earlier today was that these enterprises, especially for enterprise-funded systems, these enterprises need to budget over time for replacement and for upgrades. So we've got a project right now where there's a system that was installed not that long ago. It was a new building in 2011. This system was installed in 2011. It was at the beginning of the LTE implementation. It did not have, initially did not have carrier RF sources. They were just bidirectional amplifiers feeding it off air. That's all changed. The network can't handle, another carrier wants to get on, the network can't handle it. When we have the discussion with the venue and we tell them that this has to be replaced, it has to be replaced because, like Paul said, it doesn't handle these new frequencies that have come out since this was installed. It doesn't handle these new technologies that have come out since this was installed. And they're just beside themselves because they're thinking, well, I didn't finish amortizing this yet. It's only 7 years old. And, in this industry, 7 years is a long time. So, I mean, that's what we're seeing. And unfortunately, what happens in that case and what's going to happen in this particular case is it has to be a rip and replace. On this particular one, and we're starting to see more of this. And that's because, these systems were put out in the late 90s and the 2000s. They were, I'll say some were during the 2G era, more were during, I'll say, the 3G era. They just can't handle the newer technologies. As Paul said, they don't have enough power. So when I add more frequencies to it, the coverage keeps shrinking. And they don't have the frequencies. The new frequencies have been added. And one big underlying problem is the in-building industry was still relatively young. It's still relatively young now, but it was young at that point, younger. And this equipment in this particular installation, the vendor, and it's a good platform and it's a good quality vendor, and I'm not going to mention any vendors, but the vendor doesn't support it anymore. It's not a platform that they support. In fact, it's not even a platform that you can get your guys trained to support because the vendor doesn't even offer training. So now you have to describe this situation to the venue owner, and they're thinking this stuff is 7 years old.
Right.
And a lot of their other systems in their buildings, they can go more than 7 years. They can augment it. They can do whatever. The good news in this system is some of the components and some of the difficult construction components can be reused, like the fiber. The fiber can be reused to some of these nodes. This coax cable can be reused. Got to change the antennas, got to change connectors, got to change the electronics, but it's not a full build, but it's certainly more than what they expected. And we're seeing that more often.
Yeah, and just one thing to that point that you were mentioning is that there are a few partners that we work with that are working on we'll call it DAS on demand, which is more along the lines of what you were saying, which is more like Google, Microsoft, where you pay a fee and you just get online and you start doing your work. You don't really know what code was written. You don't have all the servers, as was mentioned earlier, but your stuff works. So that's something that we know the building owners can understand. I want my services to work. What services? All of them. Or this carrier plus that carrier, whatever. They can pick and choose. Oh, and I need public safety because I know that mandate's coming. So they have a very basic acknowledgement of what they need. And then if again, there are some companies coming up with these DAS on demand models, which we think it supports everything that we do because we're here. Whether it's the gear that goes in, whether it's the services to be installed, managed, monitored, upgraded, all that stuff still takes place. Nobody really steps on anyone's toes. I think that is something that moves the needle more into the building owner's lap, which they can say, oh, I can budget for this. I can do something monthly. I don't have to really worry about that 5-year window where this thing starts to fold back on itself, and now I've got the old one. What would really be neat to see is as things move more and more in advance is some kind of a certification or stamp or something that they can promote themselves to say this facility is X. Which means, from a connectivity standpoint, I think there's some articles in the magazine actually that talk about different property technology companies that would be something that, a building owner can say, no, I know what I'm getting now. And then if you go even further step, which is, I don't think it was really difficult for hotels to charge you $13 to $25 for parking. Well, if you put $1.50 for technology, you would say the trade-off is crazy. I'll take that all day long to ensure that my device is connected. Those are the things that I think, as they become more familiar with technology and wireless, that they say, look, I'm going to promote this. I'm going to put this in there and go in the southern, go to Florida. Who pays resort fee? Everybody. Is it on the website when you book a particular hotel? No. Such and such hotel, Cypress Creek, Florida, bing, bing, bing. $150 a night, then you get your bill. It's like resort fee, $50. And all of a sudden, but you just pay it. You say, oh yeah, well, it was a nice resort. There was a pool, there was a gym. Vegas. No one sits there and argues over $5 a night. They just don't. You're happy to be there. You're happy to have the grounds, and they maintain it and keep it pretty. So. and
Okay.
mission accomplished.
Yeah, and we have time, we'll get more to, some of the economic considerations of who's paying for what. But Dominic, looking into the future, we talked about, dealing with older technologies, 5G coming out and new frequencies. How are you helping some of your clients, plan for that, and more broadly, for the group, kind of future-proof, if you will, so they don't have to do this again, 7 years down the road?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is, and I think it was Brian from Verizon who had said it earlier, that if the building's fiber rich, the biggest thing that we're seeing is the incremental cost to put additional strands of fiber in. When you're putting when you're pulling a fiber cable, add a few more strands or however many more strands, is relatively inexpensive as compared to running another fiber cable in the future. So it's easy enough to just have excess fiber installed when you're installing it, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. We do know that I need more bandwidth. We do know that I'm probably going to be connecting more devices, physically connecting the devices. These devices all have transport back to the main hub or head end, or even back to the system core via broadband fiber. So, I mean, the biggest thing that we're seeing is, and oftentimes you just build it into the cost. It's so little. It's not even what Greg's talking about with these fees, right? It's so little incrementally, because the labor is the same or roughly the same to install it, but the incremental cost of the cable is really, I mean, it's $1 or so. I mean, it's not a lot of money. So that's one great way to do it. The other thing is 5G. It'll be interesting to see what happens with 5G. The question is how will 5G impact building? How it would be used in building. I don't know that anyone's, there was a panel on it, but I'm still not sure that anyone really understands how that's going to be marketed and what that's going to be and how that's going to impact these systems. Most of the 5G discussions that you hear in the press are all millimeter wave spectrum. None of the equipment out there today, or none that I'm aware of, has millimeter wave capability. So everything's going to be an adjunct. So if I'm adding additional amplifiers, adding additional electronics, if I've got additional fiber there, I can probably add that on later on. The other thing is when you get these higher frequencies, so like another band that's coming out in the not too distant future is the CBRS band, up at around 3.5 gigahertz. It's a natural extension to the bands that are out there today, the 2.3 and 2.5. You can add on equipment to an existing system if there's fiber already there. As the frequencies get higher, the ranges get shorter, what's going to happen is these antenna lines and the coax cable and the antennas are going to have to get shorter as well. So if the fiber is your home run, and that's the big, expensive installation, if I put the fiber in today, recognizing that I'm probably going to have these short antenna runs, I might only have to pull a few ceiling tiles instead of pulling every ceiling tile. That's, I think, probably the simplest way to future-proof as much as possible today.
Okay. And Paul, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure, especially future-proofing when you're building a new building is really critical to actually, when you're talking to your architects and your A&E firms, that they really understand what the needs for these types of systems are, so they design that in right from the beginning, because it's much more difficult to design conduit system, fiber paths, making sure that you have dedicated space with enough power for a head end or a data room, because really what's happening is these technologies are all collapsing together. The convergence is truly happening. It's not just going to be Wi-Fi. It may be CBRS. May be a combination of different technologies that ultimately makes 5G, and you want to be able to, you want to make sure that you have that infrastructure in place to support whatever technology rollout's going to come. Because no different than the IT guys in the data world, typically you have a 3-year cycle where you're changing out servers and routers and different equipment. The same kind of concept here is going to apply to the wireless space, where you're not going to see this technology there for 10 years. It's going to be a couple years and boom, you got to rip and replace and put the next one. But if you lay that foundation out there that you can change the electronics and the antennas quickly, then your costs are minimized, because the construction costs, as we all know in New York, you have these high union labor costs that are really driving the cost of these projects. It's really not the technology costs, it's the construction costs that do that.
And just changing the topic a little bit, Greg, you and I were talking about different architectures for different building profiles. Passive DAS, active DAS, small cell. What are there like general rules of thumb that you bring to the table when you're looking at these different building types and the solutions that that you're offering to your customers?
Sure. What we see is driven from different aspects. Some could be, carriers have their favorite flavors of different things. It used to just be BTS or repeater. Now we've had some carriers who do a combination where they'll want to have an enterprise system put in, and they'll want a repeater for voice and a small cell for data. So, that's something that's kind of a new configuration. We also see some buildings drive it, of course. So we've done some very large structures, 500,000 plus square feet, but they're one level. Distribution plants or manufacturing plants, things like that. And in these places, again, when they're being designed, they look like an empty space. They say, oh, maybe we just get a couple repeaters. Of course, there's a public safety mandate that has to go, so it looks like maybe something very low cost and simple. But again, we did the research. The company themselves actually stores plumbing parts. So there is going to be tons and tons of metal and steel in this 1 million square foot one-level facility. So guess what? One repeater and a couple antennas is not going to cut it. But again, we're the ones who are responsible for putting this design and this plan together, so we work with our partner to make sure that they understand this is the implications. So bring the customer into the mix. Again, we don't talk technology, we just say, what do you do? What's going to be here? What type of building is it? So again, a skyscraper, obviously, you're going to have a lot of different aspects. So with separating the floors, using low power, mixing medium power and high power remotes. Those are the parts of the DAS that control the signal, which reach out to the antennas. So we want to again make sure that we're working in a hospital environment, totally different than working in a say a ball field that's got the open air, with concessions and a bowl. So we definitely mix and match, and as Paul mentioned, being able to lay a foundation that has the ability to be upgraded, although we don't know what's going to happen in 15 years. However, we do have a good idea of what's going to happen in the next several, and we have the frequencies, they're outlined. And the other aspect too is making accommodations for what seems to be a new area called private LTE, where a building owner or a facility owner may have a certain section that they want covered specifically for their needs. So these private LTE type systems will be able to allow that to get them separated from what we'll call the commercial side. So that's also something to be aware of that's going to be working
thanks.
pretty soon.
Anything either of you want to add to that before we turn it to the floor? Okay. Yeah, I think we're bumping up against the time. Is anybody here got some questions for the panel? Yeah, go ahead.
Unlike the other utilities, this utility needs to grow every 3 years. I don't need a bigger water pipe every 3 years. I don't need a bigger electrical circuit every 3 years. Maybe every 10 or 20 years I need to upgrade my tower. But it's always a challenge to figure out how much future-proofing to add in. Because the passive components aren't available at reasonable prices for the next generation of frequencies that are going to be allocated.
I disagree with that.
You say,
No, we're making the filters for all the new frequencies.
and they're, all the 3.5 gigahertz stuff is available now, so I can deploy broadband
yeah.
from 600 to 3.5 at the same.
Yeah, we're in the process right now. Some are available.
This is great. A little bit of drama brings some excitement.
So the challenge, the question remains, and we banter back and forth. The question remains: how do you share with somebody, a building owner, that this is not like the other utilities? That we have to plan for several generations of technology in advance, and yeah, I gotta go back into the ceiling and replace those connectors and cables and antennas.
Well, we actually had a venue present us with exactly what you just said recently. We did a BOM, kind of for the basic services for all the carriers right now, and they said, well, tell us about the future. So we did what Dominic said, which is try to plan for what's not available yet, knowing what we know about the frequencies, the capacities, things like that. But we were honest to say, this isn't going to be a simple upgrade, right, of swapping out a component here and there. There is going to be a level of an overlay system, a separate system, but it's still industry determined. Are you going to blanket the coverage in this new 5G? Are you going to reserve it for a smaller section of your building? So we worked together with them to put together what we'll call a futuristic model that showed them, okay, well, in the economies of scale, is it going to be 10x? No, maybe it's 5. They wanted to know, just generally speaking, what our version of the future would be based on knowledge specifically in CBRS. But we came back and said, again, are devices ready? Are their iPhones ready? Are their laptops ready? All the same thing, which
whether it's
wasn't
CBRS,
right.
whether it's 600 or whether it's 6 gigahertz, there's always that next thing on the horizon that we don't have the gear for. We see it coming, and it's hard to let the building owner, the venue owner know that you're going to have to do this again.
Well,
and again.
we just said,
It-
look,
it doesn't
yeah,
stop.
when I was at Sprint, and there are several Sprint Nextel people in here who face this all the time, right? Which is, you want me to buy 50 air cards, 1,000 air cards? What about the next thing? If I buy them now, will my boss be mad? You know what? You can do nothing, and you won't have any access to your technology, to your data. You won't know where your police cars are. Whatever you're trying to do, you won't have that. But you won't have made the quote-unquote mistake of buying too early. So in a year, you'll have 1 year of no activity. You're a delivery company. You're not delivering services. You're not making money. You're just waiting. So trust me, we do the best we can to tell you what we have today for our technology. It's LTE. It's this fast. Well, they didn't know that 5 meg download was going to be 20 meg. Okay? Well, which happened. Overnight, the carrier did it. It didn't affect them at all. So we tried to promote this makes business sense for you now. We'd love to take you into the future, but as you said, there's always going to be some limitation to what you can actually document and plan for. So be happy with what you have now, do great things with it, and then we'll continue to be with you as this thing evolves.
I think,
Thank you for your question.
just real quick,
Okay.
changing their mindset is critical.
Agreed.
Okay? The way that it used to work in the past is gone. It's got to change. It's more like, and they are very knowledgeable on how the IT world works. And this is becoming more like that IT play. So as long as you have that basic fundamental building block infrastructure in place, the technology change becomes a lot quicker. So for example, 15 years ago, they were using one type of technology for their data center. Now all of a sudden it's routers and switches. The mainframes are gone. But guess what? They're using that same room, and the power and the air conditioning is still there to support that. No different with this. As long as you have that fiber capability, the conduits, the actual runways where you can deploy quickly that new technology, you should be pretty good shape, because those are just the things that cost you the most amount of money to change it out in the long run.
Yeah, I would agree. I think myself and my partners, we come from an operating background. So the first thing is tell them the truth. And I agree with you, Paul. If you can demonstrate that it's analogous to IT platforms, that it's going to continuously need upgrades, that's the first thing. We're going to keep using this same room. That's the second thing. The third thing is on some of these passive components, as Greg said, some of the components are available today, some aren't. Some are available when they first come out, they're at a higher cost. The question is, do you want to do the higher cost right now? So you talk this through with them. The most important thing is, and this is what we usually practice, and that is put these, when you design the system, put them in a place that they're easy to get to, so that they're easy to swap out. So the swap out of it becomes the cost of the component with a little bit of labor as opposed to a full construction project. And that's typically what we do. And that helps as well. It's not that you avoid cost, you minimize future cost is what you do.
So I have a feeling this dialogue is going to be going on for the foreseeable future. Do we have time for one more question? Yeah?
How about a comment? I think Josh, did you just show up? No. Okay, wrong guy. Sorry, I thought I saw you back there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, over here.
Hey, how's it going? Tilson from Are you finding that most of your customers are opting for that meet current need for low-cost option versus putting in the passive infrastructure to meet the future needs from, say, 600 to 6 gigs?
I think it always comes down to money.
Paul,
And
what was
so
the,
what happens?
the two quotes that one of your clients had received?
Yeah, we had a project we were just looking at, a fairly large venue. The customer, it's actually an enterprise solution. They went out and got a couple quotes. They really didn't understand what they were looking for. They got one guy that gave them a quote for $80,000. And then they had the second guy that came in, or girl, whoever it was, that gave them a quote for $1 million. And they're like, wow, how could it be so disparate between the two? It's really because that neither of those organizations really took the time to understand what they were looking for. So that's the key, is really understanding what your client's looking for. And to answer the question I think you were getting to, it's very difficult to actually design the electronics component pieces. It's really easier to do that infrastructure piece.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I would say, one strategy that I've practiced in all my years is that if you can get the project down to cost or coverage, that's great. You're almost there, because coverage you can solve, right? There's zillions of technology to figure out the coverage. Cost, again, can be solved, right? Because you can say, hey, whoa, that's a lot, fine. We'll spin it back. What's your budget? $100,000, fine. Here's a $100,000 system, done. If you are stuck in technology and you can't get them to commit to a budget, then you're really going to be stuck. And that's the point we're trying to get is, if you can get them down to say, that's too expensive, that's great, or I want this carrier and this carrier, we can solve that all day long.
I think it comes down to what their pain is. So if their pain is, we've talked to someone recently where they wanted to have a specific carrier in there because they had a major account with the carrier. They wanted the other carriers in there, and you heard that this morning as well. They wanted the other carriers, but basically, I have to have this carrier in there because that's who my major account is with. But that was their pain point. So they're willing to do more to resolve that pain. But with the other carriers, since it wasn't their account, they weren't as, they wanted it. It was a nice, that could have been a trade-off. It really comes down to what their pain is and what.
Right? They said,
it's a
okay,
cost,
these
exactly.
carriers, is this much more? No, I'm going to stick with the one I have to.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
you solved
Yep.
it. You got it to cost.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
you got it done.
Dominic, any final words of wisdom before we wrap up here?
No, I think I've been doing this for 37, going on 38 years, like I said. I've been blessed that I've been in the same industry for a long time, just the right place at the right time, and been able to see all this. I'm just excited about everything that's coming, and the fact that we're having these conversations, and we're going to continue to expand these things over the next however many years. It's great to me, it's great news for everyone here in the audience and anyone who's watching online. It's good business to be in.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope that was informative, and I'd like to thank our panel for all their insights today.
So again, our thanks to Paul, to Greg, to Dominic, and to Rob. Gentlemen, we so appreciate it. And as we just saw a moment ago, I think we could easily set up a 6 to 8 hour day and just kind of do this all the way around, maybe add a couple more people to the conversation. So again, one more time for our panel. Thanks to them. We truly appreciate it. Thank you, Rob. Really great job.